Welcome to the Obsessed with Plants podcast. I'm David, and I'm obsessed with plants with my co-host here.
And I'm Chris, and I'm the wannabe gaucho today, the Brazilian, Argentinian gaucho. So this is not a bong. I'm drinking mate, yerba mate. So one of my favorite things about mate, one, you can grow it here, which I think is phenomenal, is it's a tea plant. It's kind of like green tea, like it has the bitter flavor to it, but it has all of the nutrients necessary to sustain life, except for calories. So it's a pretty good overall healthy drink. It's very caffeinated, so I enjoy it. The tradition, which we're not going to do today because I don't want to spill it on this equipment, is like the gauchos and the cowboys in Argentina, when they're sitting around, one guy will fill up the gourd and he'll drink the first one all the way down because it's the most bitter. And then he'll fill it all the way up, pass the gourd to the next person, and then they drink it. And because it's antimicrobial, you don't have to worry about trading cooties or, whatever. But I'm going to thoroughly enjoy sipping on this little yerba mate. And Luke and Sonia, actually, at a natural farm, they do yerba mate as a, what do you call it? Like a cold barrier.
Yeah, they put it on I think it's the north side, right?
Yep, on the north side. And I don't know where he gets his trees. I know in Pearson, Florida, at Flowing Well, they sell them actually at a really good price and a big size. I learned the hard way, though. I did not know you have to dry it first. I tried it first fresh off the tree and was like, oh, I'm going to be so cool. Oh, no, I had like diarrhea and throwing up. So, and then I asked my friend Karini from Brazil, and she was like, oh, no, you have to crush it and dry it first. And I was like, wow, definitely just...
Slight disclaimer, you couldn't give yourself real problems.
Please dry it and crush it first and, all the stuff.
You never told me that. So last 2
or
3 years of you constantly like, yerba mate is great. I am glad I haven't been successful with it because I would have had a bad week.
Yeah, it's definitely a dry it, crush it, like prepare it first, have it smoked over a fire, whatever. So anyway, let's jump into the topic this afternoon is what?
Soil building, and amending.
And I do like what you said in the last podcast episode. And talking about like when we have problems with pests or disease in our plants, and the phrase you were using is compost is like, that is pretty much the answer. And so jumping off of that, looking at how do I level up my food forest? How do I get more production? How do I compost? It's build your soil. If you want healthy fruit trees, you got to have healthy soil. It's pretty much the...
And I mean, we're saying compost, but then that can take many forms too. And different ways of going about it too. Everybody's situation is different. So, I mean, there's obviously your ideal way of doing it. Then, the best ways to go about it, your best practices. And even some more of just the foundationals of, are you not able to do certain methods because not every method is available to everybody? Kind of your core foundation of what things should you be doing, even if you don't have access to.
Are you trying to tell me not everybody should have chickens?
Not everybody can have chickens.
That's true. Chris. That's true. They moved into the wrong HOA, if that's true. But I mean, but it is true.
Sometimes,
sometimes they can't.
45. I mean, where I live right now, it takes 45 minutes to get outside of an HOA. So
I don't know what I would do without chickens. Like, who would I cuddle at night? Like, if I didn't have a dog and chickens, I'm like, I gotta hold my little birdies every day.
You start eyeballing the wild and migratory ducks.
Oh gosh, or the peacocks. Oh my gosh, that would be
little whistling ducks.
I do. Yeah, there's a couple of them that are over there. They're kind of fun. Cute. So when we look at building our soil, there's a lot of ways to do this, and so I think let's kind of break it down, for people in kind of an organized-ish way of, what is our gold standard? What is the best ideal? If you're able to do this, here's what we would recommend.
In a perfect world. This is how it should be done.
Which it's not, I mean, really, it's not right now. And then second, maybe we just talk about what are some best practices that work for most people. And then, last, when you have to amend using inputs, what are some of our foundational, ones in there. So in your opinion, because you are a farm guy, you have food forests, you have animals. What kind of animals and whatnot do you have mostly on your farm? Just so we know a little bit of your background and expertise.
Yeah, so the background, it's an old citrus grove, and we've slowly converted that into horse pastures. My father loves horses. He's had horses most of his life. Anytime he can afford one, he's had one. And so then we have, grazing for that. And then I've slowly incorporated ducks, geese, chickens
Okay.
for the reason of amending. That was the main reason, was
Okay.
pest control and soil amendment, because, we have
For the ducks.
no, for ducks and chickens.
Ducks and chickens.
Yeah.
Okay, got
The
it.
reason I chose chickens was because when searching up, because we had chickens a long time ago when I was little, and we just had a huge gap where we didn't have any, was that the online, they're like, oh, they'll eat more ants. And I was like, oh, okay. I'll do our chickens over ducks then. They don't.
Oh,
They don't.
no.
That was the main
It
reason for
was a
doing
myth.
chickens.
The
It was a
internet
myth.
lied to you. I'm
Yes,
so sorry. Shocking.
I got duped. So now
Oh.
I'm like, I would do ducks and only have ducks because they are less destructive.
And they lay more eggs per bird per year.
some
You
of them
get
do.
an extra
Not all of
amino
them.
acid.
Not all of them, but some of them do. Yeah.
They're great.
If you can duck shop, but the ducks don't scratch up the soil, so they're less damaging to the soil, so they're
Okay.
more improving that way. But the reason I have more chickens than ducks is the chickens go to bed on time and the ducks don't, and so the chickens
Yeah.
get eaten by wild animals a lot less than the ducks. That's
I
really what
see.
boils it down to.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a little bit of a
Now,
design
do you
flaw
put
with
your
that.
ducks up every night?
Yeah,
Okay.
but the
And
ducks.
what about geese?
Yep, same with the geese. They all go to bed. The downside is the geese and the ducks. They don't go to bed before it gets dark. They go to bed after it gets dark, which that dusk time is when most of the predators are out.
Yeah.
So, but ducks, great soil amendment and weed control. And that's the entire reason we have them. The eggs and the meat occasionally are just the benefit of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, soil improvement is why I have them.
I'm smirking right now because I'm remembering several years ago, I lived for a while on this like Native American, like nature sanctuary, basically, the Blue River Forest experience. And we had these ducks in the duck house, and I wanted to find a way to call them into their house. Have I ever told you this?
No.
I wanted to call them into the duck house every night. So instead of like just shaking the pail or like calling them to put them in every night, it was around October, and I had just watched the old like Disney Hocus Pocus, which I don't know if you've ever seen, has
No.
like Sarah Jessica Parker and Bette Midler, and they have this song in there that's like, "Come little children, I'll take thee away," and I changed it to Duckies to "Come little duckies, I'll take thee away," and then so I started like singing the song to the ducks every night, and it worked, and I trained the ducks to come in, and so like I would come outside, like I'd leave a teepee or come out of an RV or one of the tiny houses, and I would just start singing the song, and all of a sudden, this little line of duckies and their little feather butts came walking along.
See, it's already hard enough to convince somebody who's like helping you take care of your animals while you're away to holler for the horses. They're already weird enough. So then you start singing to your ducks a chant, like a cult chant. That's to be really hard to convince friends and family to start singing your little cult chant.
If they don't know that song from Hocus Pocus, we're not friends anyway. Like my friends all know that song. Oh my gosh. Okay. So when we look at the gold standard, we've kind of already hinted at, in our personal opinion, that animal rotations and animal interaction is probably, possibly, definitely the best way to build soil.
Yeah. I mean, it's just naturally cycling the, ingredients from within the land. I mean, the plants are drawing up minerals from the ground. They're producing it into their bodies and their fruit. And then the animals will come in and eat them and then decompose that matter and give it back into the soil.
Yeah.
And
And
it's just the best
historically,
cycle.
before fences, the bison, buffalo, we call them, but they're bison in America, they did that for us. Their migratory patterns of their herds, they did chop and drop and animal rotations on their own. They did it naturally. That's why we're seeing this resurgence of the bison herds, like in Yellowstone, and how the land is coming back with this beautiful abundance. And it's incredible watching what happens when animals steward that system. Now, obviously, we don't have bison at this point. I wish we did in Florida, but since we don't,
there's a couple people now doing it. And
yeah,
it's
there
interesting.
There are
It's very interesting.
a lot in Kentucky, a lot in Tennessee. But since we can't, we do have to rotate animals on a farm or a homestead. And I think before we get into how do we rotate and how often and whatever, I would say the general rule of thumb is rotating more than you think. No matter
Absolutely.
what the species, if it has feathers, fur, ruminant, whatever it is, like rotate more than what you think, unless you're trying to do a hard reset, which we can talk about. But what was that documentary, Carbon Cowboys?
Yeah.
And they would talk about high intensity rotational grazing, which is a wonderful method, but it is very intensive for the farmer, for our interaction and our involvement. but the way it builds soil,
Yeah.
the way it builds the ecosystem is exponentially greater than any other soil building method.
Well, it's like any investment, right? The more money you put into it, the faster you can get something huge out of it.
Yeah.
And then the investment in this case is your time and energy.
Yeah.
And that will obviously yield you much greater numbers. But if you do it wrong, you're going to have a much bigger loss too.
Right.
If you're not managing that grazing properly, if you're leaving them on too long, it's going to take longer for the system to bounce back. And depending on how tight your margins are with intensive
Right.
grazing, you may have a thing of like, if you overgraze your pasture by 2 weeks, now that pasture isn't recovered when you come back to it. And then now it's overgrazed again. And then you just start this tumbling downhill of,
Yeah.
So you do have to be very careful and,
And you have to be more careful than some. Like my background is more in with like chickens and ruminant animals, cows and goats and sheep and whatnot. Yours with horses, you have to be much more careful
Yeah.
because of colicking than I do. So talk a little bit about like in your horse world, what are some of the ideal ways that people that have horses, how can they do rotational grazing when you have primarily an equine farm?
Yeah. So with horses, for anybody who doesn't know, because they don't have a ruminant, their digestive system is a lot more sensitive. And that's okay. It's not a bad thing, but it just makes it a lot more challenging. They have to be a lot more selectful. They can forage just like any other animal, but they are primarily grazing, especially here in the US. Their gut biome is not equipped at all
And
to handle anything other than your standard grass.
Why are most horses microbiomes so depleted? Why do you think?
It's just a lack of diversity, honestly.
Because they're getting bag feed mostly
Yeah, I mean,
in a lot of farms.
I mean, it's not as bad as it sounds. I mean, lots of feeds naturally have probiotics added to them anyways, but their gut biome is very much tailored towards grass, and more grass.
Right.
And that is, in most cases, what they'd be eating naturally anyways, but they are able to eat those foraging things, some of those, larger leaf things. Our animals, they love cabbage palm leaves, and they'll down a whole cabbage palm or oak.
Which is technically in the grass.
Yeah.
And what I'm noticing is you're using the word forage, which is different than fodder.
Yeah.
So foraging, for people that don't know, foraging is mostly the grasses and the smaller, soft herbaceous plants that are on the ground, versus fodder is the taller, it might have woody stems or sticky stems, which is better for ruminant animals. They actually prefer the fodder versus as much forage.
And so with those changes, I mean, everything requires slightly different gut bacteria to decompose and to digest. And if they just don't have that, they can get very sick and they can get colic, which is the number one killer for horses, which essentially boils down to the horse can't throw up. There's nothing they can do.
Or burp.
Yeah,
or
they can't
release
burp.
Gas, nothing.
Yeah, occasionally they can fart, but honestly, most of that is their natural digestion. And so if something's wrong, they can't let out the gas. It just keeps going. And
they
stuck.
literally swell up. Like they can blow up like a balloon.
Yep, they can swell up. A lot of times, if it's something that's bad for their diet, it may not be a production of gas so much as the stuff gets locked in their stomach and there's nowhere for it to go. So it starts to rot in their stomach and then it'll just rot through their stomach and they usually die before that happens.
Yeah.
But
I know a lot of folks in the WEC world, the World Equestrian Center up in Ocala, they're having a lot of good luck with the new equine probiotic, the SCD probiotics,
which has been sold out for months.
It has, because it turned out that everybody was having such good luck with it, both in preventing colic, but also helping the animal work through it. And it can work in synergy with the conventional treatment. You can also add in the probiotic to it as well as some of the other medications. So it's a really wonderful one, but when it comes in, you got to get it. And I know the company is trying to do better. I just don't think they realized how well that product worked and how much it's
and I don't think that, even in the equine world, most people didn't realize that was a problem. Because if you're only feeding, most people only feed one type of hay. Yeah. It's whatever grass they have on their property. And especially in Florida, that's terrible feeding.
Coastal.
Yeah. And then they'll get one type of grass. So they have to have basically two types of gut bacteria. And then maybe something for whatever their bag feed is. But most people only buy one kind. They're very brand loyal. And so, if you want to introduce other things, you need that diversity, which means you need to introduce it very, very slowly. Yeah. Especially with horses. Other animals, the ruminant kind of is a stopgap for that a little bit. But the horses, if you look overseas, I've done a decent amount of kind of reading up on what can they eat. And there's this huge list overseas of like, oh, our horses eat this, our horses eat this. Even Jeff Lawton's videos, he has stuff about stuff he feeds his horses. But then you look at US based stuff and they're like, oh, that'll kill the horse.
They can't handle it.
And I'm like,
sugarcane is a great example.
I'm like, that doesn't make any sense because historically these horses all came from the same genetic pool, just far enough back. So that makes no
But
sense.
ours
on
don't
why
have the biome
no,
to be able
and
to
and that's
handle
the
it.
difference is that they've been experiencing very similar species overseas that have these things, so they're able to eat more leguminous things. They're able to eat more, even in the mimose family.
Right. So for you, how do you best recommend utilizing horses to build your soil then?
Just honestly graze them through. You just bring them in, let them eat it for a bit, let it eat it down, and then move them on. And then you can keep doing that. This year especially, I actually ran them through the front food forest.
Cool.
We had half of them went to a summer camp over the summer, and then just for kids to use and stuff. But that brought us down to just 3, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try running them through the food forest, and they did great.
That's
They
awesome.
walked through, they picked through some of the bamboo. They were introduced to that. They ate down any of the weedy grasses. They damaged a few things, but they left alone.
They're smart.
They love the mulberries though.
Nice. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Mulberry leaves and the berries themselves. Horses love it.
And my we have one that's a little older. That's my personal one. She started doing a lot better, like health wise, when she started to really diversify her diet a little bit.
Now I know in the wet community, their practice with mucking stables is they typically muck the stables, put it in a dumpster, and they remove the manure off-site. What is a different, potentially better way to handle the manure handling
Honestly,
than
just
sending it off?
Just putting it around your fruit trees, spreading it. Ideally, spreading is the best because you can aerate it. You can compost it. I feel that it's a little bit of a waste of time with horse manure specifically. Not any other manures. You should always compost your manures or let it age. With horse manure, it's light enough that you can spread it out and it's not going to damage anything. It's mostly just thatchy material by the time it's it's gone through their digestion. And so you just spread it out, put it around some fruit trees.
And you're talking about spreading it on pasture.
Correct.
Okay.
Pastures, or if you have like a food forest you're not eating from at the time. So if it's a time where you're going to leave it for a while or something like that, you can put it on there. You just want to worry about any sort of contaminants that you could personally ingest.
So we're not doing it on lettuce or kale or anything like that. No leafy greens. Yeah. Because you'll get splashed from the water that's going to come up, and ain't nobody got time for E. coli and H. pylori and all that stuff. So
and with horse manure, it's a little bit safer than other types. We don't share too many things, but why risk it? It's better just to spread it out in the pastures, spread it on your, if you really want to really encourage your own personal consumption, put it on your chop and drop species.
Right. Yeah, that's great. And I think the only thing that I would say to be cognizant of and be aware of is when using horse or cow manure, know what their food source is.
Absolutely.
So have they had graze on? Hay that has been sprayed with graze
or
on.
feed. I mean, there's been some, Purina, I think 2021, there was a huge Purina thing, and that was in the foods too. So if you buy Tractor Supply brand, that's Purina.
Yep.
And that can go through the feed, through them, into your ground. And if you're eating something that could be getting to you too. So you do have to be a little bit careful. But when it comes to pasture management, send them through. I love the multi-species. You can have pretty much every type of agricultural animals that we have these days eat slightly differently.
Yep.
And so as long as you're careful on which ones share parasites and diseases, you can rotate them in order and graze them all on the same pasture at different times. So my current goal, once we get a little more fencing for our guard dogs to protect the birds, because we have so many predators around, is I very much want to have the horses, run the horses through a pasture, let them eat the grass down, and then bring the chickens in, the ducks in. And they will be able to just scratch up the poop and provide their own.
Right. And I think for people that have multiple species, we want to start with the ones that are the most sensitive, horses that could colic, then probably run big ruminants. So it's your cattle, it's llamas, whatever. Then the smaller ruminants, goats, sheep, that sort of thing. Then our chickens, because the chickens are going to scratch the cow patties and whatever, spread it out. They're going to eat the maggots. They're going to eat the fly eggs. They basically can spread the manure for you, and the pathogens aren't going to cross, contaminate one another, and then let it rest. Let that pasture rest and fully grow up, because by the time those horses come back in, we don't want the horses coming back in and putting their face down in the manure of the chickens.
And I was going to touch on that, especially if you have horses and sheep, you need to have chickens or some sort of scratching bird. Chickens are the best because they're the most destructive in this case. is you want that destruction of their poo.
Yeah,
There's a lot of
absolutely.
parasites with sheep, a lot of dangerous things. Goats too, but not nearly as much. Goats eat a lot higher pick
Yeah,
than the sheep do. The sheep are more grazers. So the sheep and the horses are eating the same stuff.
right.
So you do have to be careful of the horses will graze really low,
Yep.
same as the sheep. And so you got to worry about those parasites because those parasites are intentionally low grazing type parasites. So
But
you
we're
need
talking
to
about
make
rotating
sure.
fast.
Yeah.
We're not talking about leaving them on for a month
No,
on
no,
a
no.
pasture. Yeah.
Yeah, so pretty much my rule of thumb is if you can notice that there's a noticeable amount of green growth disappearing, it's already too late to.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. My friend Fred Elliott always says a good farmer is outstanding in his field, like literally outstanding in the middle of your field. Every day, someone with animals needs to have eyes on the animals, needs to have eyes on the field. And basically, the way he would always teach, like, when do you rotate your animals is if you think, oh, I should rotate those cattle in a couple days, you're already a couple days late. Like if you start thinking about it, you're already late.
Well,
you know?
that kind of goes down to the plants. Of the most nutritious part of the plant is the younger, more tender growth,
Right.
The big leaves and stuff, and that's what they're going to eat first. But that only takes a handful of days, depending on the size of the pasture, to eat all that fresh, yummy stuff. Then they start eating more of the stems and more of the sticks and that sort of thing. And by the time you've gotten to them eating the stems, well, now you've just taken the recovery period of that plant from 3 to 4 days to 3 to 4 weeks, depending on your season. And even during the rainy season here in Florida, it takes easily a week for our grasses to start flushing good growth.
Yeah.
Well, if you're rotating your pastures, a couple weeks at a time, well, suddenly your grass is just now starting to grow back, and then you graze it again.
Right.
Well, now the grass is set back from a 3-week recovery to a 3-month recovery. So it's just a matter of, keeping that high rotation.
Yeah. And if you do it wisely, you can rotate through a couple, 3-4 times in a season. Like I remember even in Howie in the Hills, we would have 120 cows that would go through a pasture. And I'm a big fan of sun hemp. I just think it's so big. There's so much protein, digestible fibers. It repairs nitrogen better than any other plant that I've seen in the pasture setting. And I've never before, until planting fields of sun hemp, seen cows literally jumping through the pastures because they were so excited to get in those pastures and eat. And they'll be 9 feet tall, plants. They'll eat them down to 3 feet, and then we rotate them out. Then a couple months later, they're 9 feet tall again. They eat them down, and you can rotate them through this like 3 or 4 times, but it creates such rich, lush soil. But I will say, rotating pastures and animals, it is not an immediate fix. It genuinely takes 3 to 5 years, 3 years to see a difference, 5 years to go, whoa, that worked. Like it really does take that amount of time to let the biome in your soil and that the soil biology adapt to the new manure. And then also for the farmer to start, it takes 3 years for the farmer to go, oh, I need to be rotating now. Oh, this is not the time of year to be putting them on that pasture.
Well, can I touch on establishing then
Yeah.
for rotational grazing? Because this is a little bit of a kind of my journey this last few years is trying to get a agroforestry style grazing on the animals. The soil's depleted. It's been a problem. Like you said, it takes 3 or 4 years to be like, okay, I really need to do something different. With that high intensity grazing, I think a lot of people start off as, oh, well, I'll just install the system and rotate all these cattle. Well, a lot of times
it's never that easy.
Well, yeah, but then you're also already at your maximum capacity. Because most people, if they have animals, they got to pay bills. They got to pay property taxes, feed bills, all this stuff. So you got to run your optimal number of animals. You can't establish a rotational grazing system and be using it at the same time.
Yep.
You really, honestly, if you're going to establish it, either let it go to rest for a while, or in my opinion, what's better, have just 1 or 2 animals, run a very few, just enough that they can eat stuff, but they won't decimate anything.
Everything. Yeah.
And just slowly build that up for, 2 or 3 years. And then once those plants are established, then start increasing your intensity. And that's when you're going to have your explosion because you have higher inputs with the animals and there's enough for your animals to eat.
Yeah. And I think 2 easy ways to do that for people that they only have 3 paddocks and they can't let one rest for a year is either section off just the corner of one. So in the corner of the pasture, put some barbed wire, some hot wire, and do some rotational grazing stuff in that, or forage and fodder stuff in that corner, or do the fence line grazing. And so start integrating maybe some Napier grass or some elephant grass or Mombasa.
Something that grows taller than your fence does.
Something taller than your fence, so they can lean over the fence, forage, get some fodder, and then still be in the pastures. Some of the shorter, non-sticky bamboos, things like fern leaf, do really well for that. Like you were saying, the mulberry is a great one, especially the bushier. The Florida native tice, I think, is phenomenal because the leaves are huge for that, and it kind of weeps over the fence without breaking your fence off. Mexican sunflower, a lot of digestible nutrients, in the Mexican sunflower. So there's so many other things that we could add into those systems that it's not just grass, that any of those ruminant or horses, those species are really going to enjoy.
Well, and the more diversity you get within the plants, the more diversity of nutrients you're going to get too. Most grasses only grow a couple inches worth of roots versus the sunflower is going to grow, a foot or two of roots. And that's all those nutrients that you're just not having access to.
Yep.
Add the trees, then, you get even, deeper and deeper.
Yeah.
So
people give me so much crap about Napier lately because Napier, if you let it grow too long, it's like sugarcane. It's like almost like bamboo. It's so hard. But the funny thing with Napier, it grows so fast. Like I had on average probably 15 to 17 feet in a growing season. It's huge. Basically every clump of Napier grass is like a round bale. Like it's that much biomass. But the key with things like Napier, Mexican sunflower, Mombasa, is it should never be taller than 6 feet. It should, because once it gets to 6 feet, Mexican sunflower gets woody. Napier grass turns into like sugar cane. And so if we keep rotating with frequency, then we don't have to worry about the woody stems of Mexican sunflower that we now have to go back and manage. If we get woody stems on Mexican sunflower or on Napier, in my opinion, that's bad management. That's not a plant problem. That's I wasn't rotating through my system enough or chop and dropping enough and cycling those nutrients.
Well, and that's what comes into, planning your management then.
I actually cleared my throat and then I muted it.
Yep.
That's all right. I mean, people are just going to go, hey, Adler, stop that. I could start slurping my mate. So it'd be like ASMR videos. And like half of the audience just went, oh my God, please don't slurp. Oh, I can't do mouth noises.
That threw me off my thought process.
I can't do mouth noises. Just can't do it. So while you're grabbing your thought process back, I want to talk real quick about rotating chickens through the system versus these ruminant animals. So let's kind of transition away from the ruminants and the horses. Now, obviously, chickens do require human interaction and they need boundaries because they will eat everything.
Yeah.
So for me, I like the solar powered fences from Premier One. I think they're super easy. They do have a direct current as well that you can use. But it allows me, like, if I have 2 agroforestry rows, I can send the chickens in their tractor in between those rows to work. They're eating bugs, insects, they're scratching, and they're turning the soil. They're fertilizing for me. And then whatever seeds, because I use whole seed like feed, whatever seeds they're not digesting goes back into the soil and they're replanting things for me. And so for me, chickens are like the ideal way in my setting to send them through the systems. I would literally have chickens even if they did not lay eggs because of the scratching, the fertilization that they add, and the manure. Like there's so many benefits to me that a chicken gives. They cuddle really easily. There's so many benefits that they give. I'm like, I don't even need the eggs. So when like molting season comes and nobody's laying eggs, I don't even bat an eye at it usually because I know they're giving back to my land. And that's why I have them. And that's why like my older hens, I just lost a hen today that was an older hen. They get to live the rest of their life on the farm because they're doing their job. Even though they're not giving me eggs, they're scratching, they're eating pests, they're adding compost and manure back into my system. So it's like, why would I ever have a compost pile when I have a living composting machine that is doing that for me on the land? Now, ducks are different, and you've got some good experiences with those.
Yeah, so you were talking about rotating them. Like if you have rows of trees or something that's in your pastures, which is a little bit harder, you have to be more careful with the management. But you do want to keep your chickens away from those just so they don't over scratch the soil. If you do want something going in there so you don't have to weed as much, that's where the ducks go in. You can then fence in that row of trees or in that row of, whatever. And they'll happily move in between them and eat the little weeds and anything like that.
But they don't eat a lot of vegetables. Like you can put them in your lettuces and your kale. You can put them in the tomatoes. They're not going to destroy everything.
Depending on how ravenous they are, which every species is slightly different. I know people who have vegetable gardens that they just run through. Now these are vegetables; they're not leafy greens. Do not eat leafy greens with your ducks in there. That's a good way to get sick.
Yeah.
But they have things like gourds and stuff like that that you're going to eat the fruit, but it's a hard shelled fruit. It's something that is, they can pull the ducks away from them several months in advance.
Yep.
And they'll just walk in between them. They'll maybe nibble at some of the old leaves,
Yeah.
but for the most part, they're just rummaging around and
Doing their thing.
They're just
Now, what
doing their
about
thing.
geese?
Geese leach out of house and home.
So they're in the chicken category.
Yes and no.
Yep.
The
And
geese
they're
are
loud.
Depends. So
I've never met a quiet one. I think I've met all the loud
original
mouths.
batch of brown Chinese geese that we got. We got them because they were egg layers because we don't really eat the meat too much. They were really quiet. And then we got some African brown geese, and that just completely changed them to be the noisiest flock I've ever heard.
Interesting.
But the geese will mainly be grazers. So if
Right.
you're wanting something like you want that additional grass control, so if you can't do horses or cows,
Yeah.
but you still want some of that grass consumption, that's where the geese come in.
That's great.
It's because they don't really eat bugs. They
Yep.
eat mainly leaves and vegetables and that sort of thing. They will root through the ground looking for like nuts edge, for example. My geese love nuts edge.
They can have all
seeds.
the nut sedge they want.
But they do really create these little pockets and holes everywhere, which then, loosely fill with sand, and then your foot caves one in and you're like, oh gosh. But then, they have the same benefit of like the ducks where their poop is more liquidy. And so it kind of just immediately, spreads into the soil. And so, if you're wanting something that's more of a grazing rotation, you could do geese and ducks rather than, or if you still wanted the aeration, you could do geese, ducks, chickens.
Yeah.
Even if you're stuck on that small scale, if you're allowed to have animals, but you can't have something that's bigger than you,
Right.
kind of, include them.
Those are some good options. Now, obviously, not everybody listening to this is going to be able to do ducks or chickens or cows or horses or whatever. And in our opinion, just as homesteaders or farmers, that is like the gold standard. That's the one that's like, let's work toward animal interactions. That is the way nature does it. When we can't do that, there's still good best practices that we can do as humans to cycle those nutrients. Because at the end of the day, the purpose of those animals is to cycle nutrients. So if the animals are not present in our system cycling the nutrients, that requires the humans to have ownership and stewardship in the system, that I am now cycling those nutrients and those interactions. Like I'm the one turning it over.
The ecosystem still requires the same interactions, whether those things are there or not. So then that means you have to fill that spot.
Yep. In the human world, that basically is chop and drop. And that's why we cut down grasses, Mexican sunflower, whatever it happens to be. And for people that put in Mexican sunflower or Napier grass or Mombasa or what's the other one? Vetiver grass, which is a great one. If we're not chopping and dropping it multiple times in a season, that plant is not doing its job. It's not enough
Including
to have
nitrogen fixers.
Correct. It's not enough to just have a bean, pea, or legume planted. It has to be chopped. It has to be dropped and cycled back into the system. The other day when I was with the Grow Your Own Florida guy, we were talking about like vetiver grass, for example, and it's not enough just to have vetiver grass. Like chop it down 3 or 4 times every single season. And he was like, dude, I hate Mexican sunflower. But the reason why he doesn't like it is not because it doesn't give biomass and use nitrogen fixation properties. It's because people don't maintain it. And they get these tall, lanky, ugly, woody stems, these overgrown clumps.
You want them to look pretty, you have to chop them. I have
Gotta
a
chop
neighbor who's
'em.
never chopped them. They're the ugliest plant I've ever seen.
It's pointless. There's no plant that is going to be wave the magic wand and it automatically gives back. We have to cycle those nutrients, or an animal has to cycle those nutrients.
Well, in nitrogen fixing plants, the whole reason they fix nitrogen is because they're gathering up beneficial bacteria and hoarding it for themselves for their own use case as a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
So the only way that they're sharing that with anybody is if they have so much surplus that they can't use it, which is very rare. Or you're chopping it and forcing them to basically drop their food to somebody else.
Yeah. And I think that the similar rule applies for animals as it does for humans, in that, people are going to ask, well, how often should I chop and drop? Well, for like the taller species, vetiver, Napier grass, Mexican sunflower, Mombasa, moringa, whatever, when it gets to be 6 feet tall, chop it and drop it. There's no reason for it to get bigger than that. It needs to go back in the soil. And the more that you can turn it over, the healthier the soil is really going to be. And if you think about it, that is what we're doing when we're composting. Like a compost pile is just nutrient cycling. I'm taking something that was above ground, I'm putting it back into the ground to feed the soil and to feed the microbes, you know? And so if the animals are not stewarding the land for us, the humans need to steward the land, you know, and steward those nutrients as well. And I don't think it always has to be humans doing it, but we still have to orchestrate it. So it's like vermicomposting or worm composting. I'm not the one in there decomposing every little ingredient, but I need to be responsible to take that part of the head of cabbage, put it inside my worm compost bin so they can turn it back into soil so I can add that back to the garden.
And most people's backyards is not suitable for the type of, environment for those type of worms.
Right.
So you're lacking that aspect of the environment of those compost worms aren't going to be in your garden beds. They're going to be in a pile of fruit, So by giving them a room or a space to do that, yes, you're the one doing all the work in terms of taking the excess manure out and throwing that in the garden and feeding them and stuff. But that would be happening naturally, but it may not be happening in the way you'd like for your garden.
Oh, yeah.
So that's just the same with the cattle and same with the animals. It's just you need that cycle to happen in order for your garden to flourish. But since you have these aspects removed because of whether it's people or your environment, those gaps need to be filled. And sometimes that even means just having to amend it. If you're in that environment where you're so isolated, you want your garden and you can't have chickens, you can't have ducks, which is probably most people.
Or you're too busy to chop and drop as much as you should.
Or you can't.
Or you can't
Some places,
physically do it. You're physically unable. Your back went out. You got busy. Or like in the villages, you can't have Mexican sunflower. And you can't have some of these taller grasses. So I think...
Or you're not allowed to chop and drop them.
Right.
A lot of those places have very strict mulch regulations.
It has to be wood chip or bark or cypress.
Some places don't even allow bark and leaves. You have to have like the chunks of wood for like a bag,
So in those cases, like people that if you can't have animals, then you got to cycle your nutrients and you got to do your chop and drop for whatever reason. When you're not able to cycle your nutrients, there's still a lot of good foundational amendments that we can use and still avoid the synthetics, So when we say fertilize, we're not really talking about fertilizer being a synthetic fertilizer. Like I'm not, I know, and I don't think we will in this conversation.
But but I use the word fertilize because fertilize means just to add. Right. It's adding nutrients. And that word I feel has been stolen a little bit from the synthetic fertilizer industries. They just got a bunch of chemicals and minerals together that do the same thing. And then they just sold it as fertilizer. Right. But now when we think fertilizer, well, what do we think? We think these harsh chemicals that are terrible. That's not really what fertilizing is. But the problem with those chemical fertilizers is it's robbing so many of these interactions and you're stealing them, which means as soon as you stop giving these chemicals, it's going to die.
It's going to die.
But then in order for these chemicals to work, you need lots of salt in the fertilizer.
More. Yep.
And salination is a huge issue.
And the salination is not just in chemical fertilizers. So when we look at even USDA certified organic fertilizers, and I will say Miracle Grow Organics is a prime offender with this, their primary source of nitrogen in their fertilizer for Miracle Grow Organics comes from soy protein hydrolysate, which in America is allowed to be 30% MSG, monosodium glutamate. So what happens is because they're using the soy protein hydrolysate, the sodium makes the plant thirsty. So it takes up more water, more nutrients, and that's why the plant gets greener because it just got really thirsty and it's taking up all those extra like nutrients to make up for all of that salt that's in there. But the problem is the salt stays in the soil.
Yeah, it's the only part of the fertilizer that doesn't go away over time.
And it stays for decades.
And if you, so that's the problem with my family's farm. It's all the old citrus grove, is that most of those nutrients from the fertilizers before we owned it left in the form of the fruit. All that nutrients. Well, the only thing that didn't go into the production of that fruit was the salt. And so now you have this property where it's more salt than anything else. And then the problem is that makes everything thirsty.
And I think a lot of people think when they look at these old citrus groves that still look horrendous. They look like barren deserts. They're like, oh, it was the Roundup that did it. No, it wasn't. The Roundup
doesn't last as long as the
doesn't
salt
last
does.
as long. The salt is still there. It was the big problem. So when we say amend your soil or fertilize, we're primarily talking about whole ingredient, often animal-based products that can be added to the soil that actually build the soil structure. Because that should be our goal when we're fertilizing or amending, is we want to be building our soil structure. We're adding humus or humate, we're adding organic matter, and we're building the microbiome.
Your goal is to feed the microbes, not the plants.
Yep.
Because if you feed the microbes, they'll feed you.
So let's break it up into a couple times a year.
Yep.
So for people that cannot run animals through, they're limited on their chop and drop, or they're doing it and they know that it's not enough. Or honestly, amending is great for a new food forest to get it started, to get it jump started the first 2 or 3 years.
And if you live somewhere that's been recently developed, you're not going to have a lot of those nutrients in the ground because this is sand and clay and stuff that's been mined from a mine. So it's 50, 60, maybe even 100 feet deep, depending on where they mined it from. So those aren't going to have any of these microbes and any of these, they'll only be trace minerals. So sometimes you need that jump start of, I need to put something in rooted. Just enough to feed everything so that you can kickstart your system.
And so in the cold climates, because we have people listening in Norway, so in the colder climates, we're basically amending our soil every other month when your growing season starts. So if it starts getting warm in May, you start in May, you skip June, amend in July, skip August, amend in September. Now, and that's true mainly USDA growing zones 3 through 8. Once we hit USDA zones 9 through 11, the general rule of thumb is early February, June, and September are the 3 months. But for the sake of the conversation, I think we're going to talk about what do you amend with when we're growing, green growth? What do we amend with when we're fruiting? And then what do we amend with right before dormancy? So in your world, what are some of the ones that you really like for the growing, the first round, February, I need to amend my soil?
I mean, it depends on how how deficient you are. I just think nitrogen. That's the first thing that I come with. So you got your blood meals, your fish emulsions. Fish emulsions especially are an easy one because you can just hook it up to a hose or a backpack sprayer or something like that.
And I like fish emulsion because you can do it as a soil drench as you're watering it, or as a foliar spray. So you can do it either or. And I would say with fish emulsion, sea kelp is an easy one to add into it. Kelp is it's not going to deliver nitrogen, but it helps the uptake of all the minerals. So it's going to allow your plant to absorb better.
And honestly, if you are noticing that your system seems like it's just not producing, and this is an early system, and it's like everything's starting to look a little peaked, I would honestly start with kelp. Something that is just allows a nutrient uptake. Just because you may not actually have a nutrient problem, they just may be locked up. So you got to make that more available, and I would start with that. And if you put too much kelp, it's not a big deal. If you put too much nitrogen, like a blood meal, you can burn something if there's too much of it. So just throwing that around is some kelp, some blood meal, some fish emulsions.
So that's all our beginning of season. So growing, we want green growth. We're doing blood meal. We're doing kelp. We're doing the fish emulsion primarily, and microbes.
What about flower? When it starts to flower, though?
Flower, I would say that's when we want to start shifting over more into phosphorus, category. So you could, and that kind of builds into fruiting. So we never want to fertilize or amend when the fruit has just set. Right at the early, even the bud of the flower opening is a great time to do that. So February is our green growth. June is usually our flowering stage. So in that time of year, I like things like bone meal, because it's got some nitrogen, it's got some phosphorus, little bits of potassium, but not a whole lot.
And this is right as the flower's opening up?
Right as it opening that bud. But we don't, when it's full on opening and fruit set, we don't want to do anything else. We want to just kind of let it set. But I think that bone meal is a really nice, gentle one. Or honestly, compost. I mean, pretty much any time in the growing season, good old compost or composted manure is the best possible fertilizer you can do. If you can't buy bags of anything else, do compost, and you're probably never going to burn anything.
Any
with good
preference
over
compost or worm compost? Any difference in time of year for that?
No. No, pretty much whenever. I don't want to do it during full dormancy, so I'm not going to do it in January or December or whatever. But So again, I would say during the first phase in February-ish in Florida, we're thinking nitrogen blood meal, we're thinking microbial stuff, we're thinking kelp. Then in June, we're doing minerals. So we're doing bone meal, we're doing maybe a little bit of azomite, some probiotics. I always do probiotics. The nice thing in that time of year, do your foliar sprays again, add some molasses maybe to feed the microbes.
Honestly, the only time I'd say probiotics are not a good time is if it's like really cold.
Yeah.
When everything's like very dormant, because the probiotics is not going to be alive either.
They're not going to thrive.
Yeah, once it gets too cold. But any other time of the year, I always say just throw probiotics.
Always probiotics.
You want something to do? Go inoculate it with probiotics.
100%. And the nice thing with a lot of these probiotics, whether it's the EM 1s or 2s or the indigenous microbes or doing SCD probiotic stuff, is they have multiple strains of probiotics. So you're getting 5 different types of lactobacillus in there, and not just just one lactobacillus.
Is there any good way of trying to like produce your own? Like composting is pretty pretty easy. Is there any way to like encourage probiotics for your own purposes, or is it better just to buy it?
That's a hard one, because there's 2 big trains and schools of thought. Like the Korean methodology in it is that in the natural Korean farming is they prefer an anaerobic style of composting, which doesn't agree with all plants. It works when it works, but it doesn't when it doesn't. It can actually kill and damage the plant. I prefer the aerobic, the oxygen-rich ones, which is why I go toward the SCD probiotics, because they're fed by like cane sugar or molasses. They can live almost indefinitely on the shelf, and to reactivate them, you just put in a little oxygen, producing thing like in a fish tank, and it just springs everybody back to life. And you don't risk anything with the aerobic versus you would with the anaerobic microbes in the soil. But yeah, I agree with you. Probiotics any time of year. Coming into dormancy, in most states, that's like early to mid fall. Dormancy, we're not really fertilizing or amending anymore. We're focusing on minerals and root establishment. So that's the time of year I'm thinking like silica. So I'm doing silica, I'm doing azomite, I'm doing rock dust, I'm doing magnesium, which is essentially Epsom salts, magnesium sulfate. You can do some light composting and just cover the soil and just let the roots grow, let them get established, because most fruit trees, berry bushes, nut trees, they're still alive and growing when they're dormant. It's just they're growing below the soil instead of above. So do what we can to support that root system. It's an easy thing to like get the Epsom salts without essential oils in them, because you don't want to kill everything in your soil, but just plain old Epsom salts, magnesium sulfate, and just take a little handful, sprinkle it around the base of your fruit trees. And it's like just magic for them coming into the spring, and just gives everybody a lot of good strength. That was my little sip.
That was your
that was my slurp, which actually means that we are pretty much done, because my drink is gone and my kettle is now officially cold.
The cue to be done.
So for those of you that are new and this was your first podcast, again, we want to always go for the gold standard, the animal rotations. Yeah. But the goal of this is not to convince you to buy chickens, but you absolutely should buy chickens. But to do what you can, to be a part of your system, do what works best for you. Interact in your system and cycle the nutrients. And if it's not the animals, then it's got to be you, or it's got to be inputs coming into your system to help build your soil. You have a healthier soil, you're going to have a healthier garden. You're going to have a more abundant food forest.
Which equals a healthier you.
Healthier you, healthier farmer. So hopefully this was all helpful to you. If you have just tuned in, please do the social media thing. Press that notification bell. Click like, click follow.
If you haven't seen the previous episodes, check those out.
They're
them
probably
out. Good, maybe.
There's good rambling in them.
There's a lot of
really
talking,
good rambling in those. So hopefully this was helpful to you. Have fun, and we'll see you in the next one.
Later.